friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be using the Firefly Friends stamp set by Rochelle Ann Miller for MFT. So I've stamped that out in Extreme Black Hybrid ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'm going to color it with my Copic markers. I'm starting with the little boy, and I'm doing his skin with E00, E11, and E13. I wanted him to have a little bit of a darker skin tone. This is a summertime scene with the little firefly, and so I wanted him to have a nice little tan. So I used that E13 up under his hairline and a little bit down the sides of his face, blended out with the E11, and then use the E00 for the center of his face for a nice highlight. And then I'm going to do his little arm as well. So I'm using that E13 on the outside edge, and then the E11, and then a little E00. I'll color in his nose with the darkest shade, the E13, and then I forgot to do his other little hand, so I did the darkest two shades on that. And then I'm trying to do a transparent glass jar, so I added a little E11 where it's overlapping his face, and then I'm going to use that as my darkest shade for the little girl. Then I'll use E00 for my mid-tone this time, and I added in E000 for her highlight. So I want there to be kind of a glow at the lower part of their faces, and that's coming from that firefly in the jar, because this is going to be kind of like a, not fully nighttime scene, but more like a twilight scene, so it will be kind of darker around them. So I want to have that little bit of glow on their faces. So I did her arms and legs in the same colors, and then I'm going to go back to that E13 to do the little band-aid on her knee. I forgot her other arm, so I'm going to color that in, and then I will take the E000 and extend that arm back to where I think it would end behind that jar, again to give it that transparent look. Then I'm going to give them both some rosy cheeks using R11 and R20, just doing a little oval shape first and then going around that with the R11. R20 was the darker shade there, and that just kind of disperses that color and makes it blend into the skin tone. For the boy's hair, I'm starting with E21, E23, and E25. I'm going to use that E21 first and map out where I eventually want my darkest shades to go. And I'm using a flicking motion to kind of distribute that color and kind of create a little bit of texture in the hair. Then I'll move on to my mid-tone, which is E23, and continue flicking that in, just not quite as far as I went with the E21. And then I'll add in the E25 and do the same, even more sparingly. That's going to create a lot of depth in that hair by having that really, really dark brown, and then, you know, all the way down to that light brown. So I'm going to work my way back in the reverse now with the E23 and kind of bridge the gap between each of those little sections that I have started, doing that flicking motion and bringing those parts together so, you know, it doesn't look so choppy. And then I'll fill in with the E21. I'm going to go back to my E25 and try to add a little bit more depth on those darker sections, because they did get kind of muted by that lighter E21. So I just want to go back and add a bit more of that. And I'm going to darken that even more. I'm going to bring in a fourth shade, and that will be E27, and that one I'm just going to use in the part to create even more contrast there. For the girl's hair, I decided to try out some different browns, so I went with some E30s, E30, E33, E35, and E37. So again, I'm starting with my lightest shade, which is that E30, and mapping out where I eventually want my darkest shade to go. I'm also using that E30 to extend her ponytail behind that glass, also behind her arm. So I skipped over the area where I did her arm and put the hair kind of hanging down behind it. And then I'm going in with the E33 and darkening that up. I also darkened up the little ponytail behind the glass, just a touch of that to make it a little more distinct from the arm. And then I'm going to move on to my E35 and begin to add a bit of that into her hair. I just want to create a lot of richness and, you know, have those highlights and lowlights. So having the 4 shades in there, I think just really gives you that look. So I'm going to blend that out with the E33 again. And I saved the E37 in this case for the end, so I went all the way back down in the reverse from the E35. So I used the E33, and then I'm going to come back in with that E30, and I'm going to blend over the edge of the ponytail that I put down on the side, and then also over the center sections of each section of her hair. And then I'll come in with that E37 and darken things up once again, just where I want things to be extra detailed. So just doing very thin little streaks using the very tip of my marker and light pressure, adding those flicks of color in there. So I have like really fine lines. And then I'll go back to my E35 once again and add a bit more of that. And then I skipped right down to my E30 and added, you know, the little bits of highlights once again. And then just like I did with the boy, I'm going to add in one more darker color. I'm going to use the E39, and this time I'm only going to use it in the places that I want to have that extra bit of contrast. So very, very little of it, but just adding a little bit more depth there. And then I'm going to go back to my E33 and just barely blend over that just to make it a little more cohesive and so those lines don't stand out quite so much. Then I'm moving on to her outfit, and I wanted to do like a little lavender top. So I picked V91, V93, and V95. So I'm going to add a little shading on the right hand side of her body, and then where the bodice meets the kind of skirt part of that baby doll top. I use the V95 for that, and then I'm blending that out with the V93. And I'm going right over the little bow and the polka dots on there because I'll go back in with a darker color in a minute. But I'll use the V91 as my lightest. And then I'll use the V99, which is the darkest shade, and I'm going to color in her little hair bows and that little bow on her top, the little frills that are on the bodice and the bottom, and then also all of those little polka dots. And they're very, very small, so again, I'm just using the very tip of my marker and barely pressing down, getting super fine lines so I can get into all of that tiny little detail and, you know, just create a bit of contrast on that outfit. The other idea, which you could do, I thought maybe I would take a white gel pen and make white polka dots, but I decided to go with the darker purple since this is more of an evening scene and I didn't want there to be too many light areas, I guess I would say. I wanted things to be a little bit more in that twilight color palette. So that's why I decided to do those details with the darker shade. And then I'm moving on to my little boy's pants. I wanted to make them jeans. My favorite combo for jeans is right here. It's B95, B97, and B99. So I use that B99 first to create a shadow under his shirt, and then I blended that out with the B97, and then I'm going in with a little bit of that B95 on the front part where it always has the most wear. And then for his shirt, I decided to go with BG quadruple 0, BG00, and BG01. And I use that BG01 as my darkest, and I'm shading him down his left side. I want that firefly in the jar to be the light source in my scene. So everything is kind of stemming from that circle area in the center. So the fronts of their bodies are going to be highlighted and the backs of their bodies are going to be in shadow. So I blended out the BG01 with the BG000, and then I used the BG quadruple 0 just down at the bottom edge closest to that jar. And I also used that to kind of extend his shirt behind the jar, giving it that transparent look that I'm going for. For his little pocket, I decided to do white and yellow stripes. So I used the Y13 as my darkest on every other one, and then the Y11 for blending that out. And I did go back and add a bit more Y11 at the bottom. And I'm going to color in the bottom of my firefly and also the little glow pattern around it with those shades as well. And then I used W1 to add some shading to her shorts and both of their shoes. I used W5 and W7 to color in the rest of the firefly, and V99 to color in her other little hair bow that I had missed earlier, R11 for her mouth, and BG11 to add a bit more shading to that jar and give it that glass-like appearance. And then for the top of the jar, I used W3 and W5 to create a little lid so that they have their little firefly that they've caught, and of course will release in just a moment. So now I'm going to move on to the grass down below, and I need to extend it beyond the lines that the artists have drawn. I need it to be a little bit wider on the left and the right. So I'm going to just continue coloring that with my darkest shade. I used G40, G43, and G46. So right now I'm using that G46, and like I said, just extending those lines on either side and keeping it very sketchy, just the way the artist has drawn it. Also adding a bit of depth to all those little areas down below where the flowers are drawn and some little pebbles and things. And then I'm going to go in with my midtone, which is G43, and just really blend out the edge of that G46 and get it nice and smooth, and fill in all of the area around those flowers, just carefully coloring around them so that I can leave them white for now and go back and color them in a moment. And then I'll come in with my G40, which is my lightest shade, and it's a big step down from the G43 to the G40. It's quite a bit lighter. Also, my G40 seems to be running a little dry, so there's even more of a difference between the two. So to bridge the gap, I did do a little tip-to-tip action. I just used the G40 to pick up a little of the G43, and went over the transition area to smooth that all out. For the flowers, I pulled out Y11, Y13, and Y15. I didn't even end up using that Y11. I just colored them completely in with the Y13, and then I went back with the Y15 and added a bit of shading to them and also colored in the centers. Then I'm going to take the matching die that goes along with this set, and I'm going to tape it in place with a little bit of Post-it tape. And I'm just taking my time to make sure that I get this lined up perfectly. And then I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine. Normally I skip this part of the video, but today I thought I would just leave it in case you were curious. And then for the bottom part, there's no coordinating die, so I'm going to fussy cut that. So I'm just leaving a little white border to match the border around the stamped images so that it looks like it is a die cut. And I'm just fussy cutting that with my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors. This is the first card making supply I was ever given for Christmas from my husband 11 years ago when I started paper crafting. I got these scissors and I still have them and use them to this day. They're still completely sharp and wonderful. Love these scissors. I'll have them linked down below in case you're interested in picking up a pair for yourself. For my background, I've cut down a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock into a square, and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks. I just have that on my Waffle Flower mini media mat, which I really love for ink blending. And I'm blending on Speckled Egg Distress Oxide for the center. And then I'm going to come in from all four sides with my next shade, which is Shaded Lilac. And I'm going to overlap that speckled egg. I don't want it to be like a pronounced circle in the center. I just want it to kind of fade into that in the center to create a focal point. And in the end, the final card, that blue is going to be mostly covered up anyway. I just want it to kind of pull focus to, our images. So I'm covering that completely with that Shaded Lilac, and then I'll go back to my speckled egg and blend a bit of that back on to smooth out the transitions. And then I'm going to add in my darkest shade, which is Dusty Concord. And I'm going to darken up the edges with this as well. In fact, most of that Shaded Lilac is going to get covered up, so I'm going to have to go back and add a little bit of that in a moment. But I wanted to create a really dark halo on the outside edge because this is going to get cut down a bit. So some of that darker color isn't going to make it onto the focal point. So now I'll blend back down in the reverse, adding a bit more of that Shaded Lilac onto there. And I'll even go back to my speckled egg and just add a touch of that in the center. And now I'm ready to stamp my sentiment. I'm not using one from Firefly Friends because I need birthday cards and it didn't have a birthday sentiment. So I grabbed this one from Potty Time by Stacy Yakula for MFT. It has a lot of really great birthday sentiments. So I'm stamping that in that Dusty Concord Distress Oxide ink. I normally don't stamp sentiments in Distress Oxides, but it did stamp out pretty nicely, and I wanted something that would be a true match, and I didn't have a purple ink that would be a true match. And then I'm popping my card base in my Misty, which is Lawn Fawn sticky note cardstock, and I'm stamping in Sunflower ink. And I'm stamping this sentiment that says, "May your birthday be filled with wonderful surprises," and then a little gift and some confetti. And this is also from that Potty Time stamp set by MFT. And I just kept shifting that confetti image and filling in the space around that gift. And then I'm going to move on to my pattern paper. Today I'm using the Doodlebug Fairy Garden paper pad. There was a print in here that I thought would be absolutely perfect for this card. It has these adorable little fireflies all over it, and I just think they're super cute. I'm going to die cut that down with the Lawn Fawn outside in stitch rectangle stackables, and I also used a piece of Perfectly Plaid spring pattern paper from Lawn Fawn just to go along with that and tie in with the yellow glow from the fireflies. So I'm going to adhere these to the front of my card now with some liquid glue. I used the Firefly print first, and then I'm going to put this yellow plaid across the center of the card at the top. Then I took the Lawn Fawn large cross-stitched square stackables and die cut my focal panel and that grassy border. Creates that little cross-stitch print around the edges, and it really kind of bound these two pieces together even though they weren't glued together yet, so I decided to just go with it. Added a thin bead of glue in that section just to make sure that didn't pop off, and left them together. And then I'm going to adhere my image also with some liquid glue, and I'm going to put it so that the boy is kind of kneeling behind that grassy border, and then the girl is standing on top of it. So I just kind of bent that forward to get them how I wanted them on that scene. And then I'm going to add a few more details to this background using these little Fantastics. These have been around forever, and I've had them in my stash forever, but I always forget to use them. taking a little bit of white pigment ink. Mine is from Colorbox. It's super old. Lawn Fawn also makes a really great one called Yeti, but any white pigment ink will do. And I'm trying to do like little lightning bug glows. So I'm just adding little white dots first in a circular pattern. And then once I have those laid in, I'm going to take a different one. They have different nibs on them. This one was kind of flattened and circular. And then the next one I'm going to use is more like a pencil tip. And I did kind of like tap them with my finger to take off some of the ink because I wanted it to be a bit more hazy, not so predominant. So now I'm going in with this kind of pencil tip one and some mustard seed ink. And I'm adding a little bit of yellow to the center of those white dots. At first I'm just laying in like just a small dot because it was really pigmented. And then once that ink is kind of less on that tip, I'm going to go and kind of blend it into the rest of that white dot. Then I'll go back to my white pigment ink, and this time I'm using that more finer tip, that pencil tip one. I just wiped it off on a baby wipe, and now I'm going around those little dots and adding a bit more of a glow by doing this little circular line around them. I'm kind of breaking it up, not making it like a full circle. But if you think of like the Starry Night painting by Van Gogh, something like that, you know, those little spiral marks around those glows, and just kind of creating a little fun texture and also just a more visual element on the cards. So I went around those twice, just kind of adding a little bit here and there, and if it was too dark I just kind of wiped up a little bit of it with my finger because that ink is pretty wet, so it's easy to do, and you know, created this little effect, you know, around them. So once that was dry, I added a little bit of foam tape to the back so it would give it a bit of lift on the card, some dimension, and I'm going to pop that up right in the center of that yellow plaid paper. So you only get a little bit on the edges, but I feel like it just helps break up some of that purple. And then I die cut my sentiment with the Lawn Fawn Everyday Sentiment Banners. So I'm going to add a little bit of liquid glue to the back of that. And I'm going to adhere that on the focal panel just a little bit up from the bottom. I don't want to cover up that cross stitch detail, so just right above that. And then last but not least, this card needed a bit of sparkle, so I'm going to add it to the bottom of my Firefly and the glow around it, and then also to the centers of each of those distant fireflies in my background. So it's going to have a nice bit of sparkle on it when you tip it into the light. And I'll give you another peek at the inside. Leave me a comment down below and let me know if you have fireflies where you live and if you call them fireflies or lightning bugs. We have them here, and it was such a huge part of my childhood in the summertime, chasing them and catching them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this card. Please give it a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of the products I used today, you'll find them listed and linked below the video in the description bar. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. I hope you all have an amazing day. Bye-bye.